Inspo. It is April 13th, and I have read quite a few books in April so far. I'm super behind in starting this vlog-style monthly reading wrap-up. So these are videos that I do every month where I talk about the books that I've read throughout the month. I try to only talk for about 5 minutes about each book, and even then, they're super, super long. So definitely grab a cup of coffee, grab a snack or whatever and settle in. Or put this on in the background. You don't have to watch me. Don't look at me. You don't have to. You could just put it on the background and listen to it. That would be great. The first book that I finished in April is The Best Girls by Min Jin Lee. This is a very short story that I get with one of my subscriptions. I'm going to say this now, and then I'm not going to say it again for the rest of the video. I am trying to get rid of that subscription, so I am reading a lot of short stories from that subscription while I can get them for free. That is why in March and April I'm going to have like a very high number of volume. The Best Girls by Min Jin Lee is a very, very short one of these short stories. It's only 37 minutes on audio, so if you read it a little faster, it's even quicker than that. But this was a great one. I love these short stories because, first of all, they let me read authors that I've never read from before and let me see if I like the author's styles. I definitely think I would read more from Min Jin Lee. I don't think I'll be reading her most famous book, Pachinko, just because it's not the kind of book that I love. But The Best Girls is the kind of book that I would love. It is short and sweet, and it is about 3 sisters and 1 brother. And it's told from the oldest sister perspective, and it tells about their life in kind of rural Korea and how these girls, although they're all smart and capable and interesting and will grow up to be good people, kind of play second string to their brother, and how happy their family was that their baby brother was born and how much they care about their baby brother, and how the whole family and outside of the family put the most emphasis on the baby brother, like what he needs, what he's gonna do, how he's gonna get through school, and less so of the girls. This is a pretty poor family, and the older girl makes some decisions kind of based on everything I just told you. But like I said, this is super short, so it was one of those stories where it's going along, and then the ending is like, whoa, whoa. So I really, really liked it. I thought it was great. The next book that I read in April is We Are Bones and Earth by Essie Ejijin. This is another new to me author. I do have a book or two by this author. I think they're most known for their book Washington Black, but I have a different book by them. This one was interesting too. This one was definitely longer. It was an hour and 10 minutes on audio, and it was about, again, siblings. So a young girl in northwestern Africa. It's unclear exactly where it is. It's set in the past, and when different warring factions in this area of Africa would take children to work for them, to be slaves for them, or to be something else unpleasant for them. So it's about a sister and brother, and the brother goes off with this warring faction. It's unclear where the brother goes. So when the sister is also kidnapped by this other culture, she tries her best to try and find her brother. And she is useful to them because she is a polyglot and she's able to speak multiple languages. So I thought that was a really interesting one. Pretty depressing. I mean, The Best Girls was super depressing too, so not happy stories by any means, but I liked the writing a lot in both of those stories. The next book that I finished in April was The Dancing Girl of Isu and Other Stories by Yasunari Kawabata. This is a collection of short stories, and they're like super, super, super short because Kawabata did this thing called like palm of hand stories, which were only like a page or two. So the first bit has 4 short novellas or longer short stories, and then the second bit has all these little tiny 1 to 3 page short stories. I read this for the TBR spin, and you can see a lot more of my thoughts in that blog over there. This was my February pick for the TBR spin. Overall, I thought this was really interesting. This is the 3rd Yasunari Kawabata book I've read, and I think a lot of his work has to do with the idea of manhood, becoming a man and being a man, the idea of the pressures and responsibilities that are put on men. Specifically in the first 4 short stories in this book, it blurs the lines between fiction and autobiography. So definitely autofiction. It's unclear whether some of them are actually nonfiction, but it is all about his life growing up as a young man. Different takes, different angles on his life growing up as a young man, man, the death of his parents, his sister, and eventually his grandfather. So it's definitely like ruminations on grief, ruminations on growing up, on having to grow up faster than you should, on isolation, on family connection. So it was really interesting. I don't think any of these stories are going to stick with me like for the long run, but I could see this one being one that I come back to occasionally and read a short story here or there again. The next book that I read in April was A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. I found this in the very beginning of the year in a little free library, and I've always seen Stacey Willingham's book. This is her first, I think, adult debut. It might be her debut altogether. It is a mystery about a young woman whose father was accused of being a serial killer when she was young. He's in jail now, and she and her brother have kind of had to fend for themselves to a certain extent because of the psychological damage that their mother suffered after their father was arrested. So this follows our main character, I don't remember her name, of course, Chloe Davis, who, in kind of reaction to everything that happened in her childhood and with her father, becomes a psychologist, but she has been self-medicating for a long time, and she has extreme PTSD and anxiety going on. She's just at the point of her life where she has met a man about a year ago, and they're going to get married, and she's super excited about it, and they're planning the perfect life, but some things keep rearing their heads from her past, and in this book, of course, she has to deal with them. And when young girls similar to those that her father allegedly murdered start to go missing, she wonders if this could be her father's work, a copy killer, or if all along the police arrested the wrong man. So, have you heard that story before? Yes, so have I. I've read this book several times now, and this was not a good version of it. There was nothing redeeming about this. I would say the only thing that was a little bit redeeming was, although they set Chloe up to be an unreliable narrator, they didn't, to the reader at least, imply that because she was self-medicating, she was like completely impaired. Other people in the story thought that about Chloe. I don't appreciate when unreliable narrators are just unreliable because they have substance abuse problems, because lots of people have substance abuse problems and function just fine in society. That's how they function fine in society. And having been a bartender and having known many people who self-medicated with alcohol, I know that for the majority of the time, those people were very lucid and able to make decisions. Now, is that always the case? No, of course not. But I find that that is a crutch that a lot of these thrillers fall back on, which really aggravates me. And I don't like it when, it's fine if society thinks that within the book, but like, I don't like it when the author is trying to tell you that as the reader and making you doubt the main character. At no point in this book do you doubt the main character. Not really. I mean, she makes bad decisions and she's stupid, but like a lot of thriller main characters are like that. So that's not why she's like that. She's just kind of dumb. And this whole story was pretty bad. It was incredibly obvious. It had the exact same red herrings, exact same twists and turns as so many other thrillers that you've read, but it had nothing new. Earlier this year when I read that thriller by Kate Ellis Marshall, Not No One Can Know, I read that one too, but the other one about the woods and the girls, like that had very similar plot points and it had very similar twists and turns, but it had some interesting writing and some interesting aspects of the plot and of the character development that made it worth reading. This had none of that. And I guess I would try another Stacey Willingham because maybe this was just her first attempt and she gets better, but like, this was not good. The next book that I read in April was Ankle Snatcher by Grady Hendrix. This is another one of those short stories, and this was another short one, so 45 minutes on audio, and I thought this one was really, really good. Very atmospheric. This is the first Grady Hendrix that I've ever read. I do have a couple of Grady Hendrix, and I've always planned on reading the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That's been on my TBR since joining BookTube, my mental TBR. I don't actually have a physical copy of it, but it definitely made me excited to read it because I really thought that this very short story was able to give you some character development, pull you into the plot. It was able to give you a little like at the end, and I really, really liked it. So I would definitely suggest, if you're a Grady Hendrix fan or if you're a horror fan, to check this one out. And specifically, like, Monster Under the Bed or ankle snatching is scary to me because I had an experience when I was little. This is not, it's not a bad experience, so don't worry. But when I was little, I loved the movie The Beastmaster, which was about like a fantasy world, like a Conan the Barbarian type world where a guy could talk to animals, which I absolutely love. Lots of the scenes are like burned into my memory, but one scene that always scared me when I was a kid was there's a scene where they have to walk through like a hallway and people are grabbing their ankles and like grabbing at them from like behind bars, and it's like really scary. So I watched that, I thought it was really scary, and then my brother took me to a haunted house when I was little. My first and only ever haunted house, because I will never go back into a haunted house because it was so traumatizing when I was little. I was very young, and there was a part where you had to walk through and somebody grabbed your ankles, and I made him take me out. Like, they had to open the extra door and I had to get out of the haunted house because I was freaking out so hard. So I have an ankle snatching issue in my life. Fun fact. The next book that I read in April was Murder at the Royal Ruby, and this is another one of those short stories. This is by Nita Prose, and this is the first Nita Prose that I've read. I do have The Maid by Nita Prose on my TBR because I found it in a little free library, so I think I will read that after reading this. I kind of read this specifically in order to see if I wanted to read The Maid. Similar to The Maid, our main character at Murder at the Royal Ruby does have a difference to quote-unquote normal people. In The Maid, I believe the main character is autistic, and in this story, our main character has like a huge birthmark on her face. So it's kind of called out in the story, and it's interesting because neither of these things are own voices for Nita Prose. It wasn't used as a hindrance necessarily in this story. If anything, this feature of our main character was something that she liked. She talked about it in like a positive way in some respects. There was some aspects where she didn't and where other people didn't, but I think on the whole, our main character saw it more as a good attribute, as opposed to like a detriment to her face, her personality, her career, etc., etc. And our main character wants to be an actress, and she's at a very swanky theater in, I guess, London, maybe. I don't know if Nita Prose is British or not, but it kind of felt like that. There is a death on stage, and our main character has to investigate. And it turns out that the main actress who died was not well liked by anybody, so there's a long list of suspects. I thought this one was fine. I didn't love it, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I would read more from this author. I don't think it had that like punch. Like, I really love these short stories when there's a point at the short story where you're like, whoa, like mind blown. I didn't feel like it had that, but I did enjoy reading it. The Shortest Day is the next short story that I read, and this is by Colm Tilbeen. Again, another new to me author. I didn't really like this one. I just thought it was kind of plotting and boring. It didn't hook me in the beginning, and it didn't, I don't know, tickle my fancy, I guess. It was fine. I didn't dislike it. I'm not super keen on reading Colm Tilbeen in general, but it was good to read a short story of his. It starts with a husband and father who is leaving to pursue some project right before Christmas. This is set in Ireland, and it talks about how he's already gotten the Christmas presents and how he definitely plans to be back by Christmas, but his wife, a little long-suffering, is like kind of annoyed that he's going off so soon before Christmas. And then we see him traveling to Northern Ireland, and we hear from different people after that, and it turns out that he's kind of looking to get into this cave or burial ground or historic natural phenomenon, and specifically on the shortest day of the year. So you see from different perspectives, people trying to help him do this, people trying to deter him to do this, and why people are involved at all and why he's involved. But like, talk about not having a punch. I think the pacing was weird. There was no like great payoff at the end. There was nothing like so exciting or interesting to keep you going. It was okay. I would say skip it. The next book that I finished in April was The Dead Take the A Train. This was my March pick for TBR Spins. You can see a whole vlog on this book. It's really long. It is 390 pages. It is co-written by Cassandra Caw and Richard Kadrey, and it is a cosmic horror taking place in New York City. We follow our main character character Julie Cruz, who is kind of a bounty hunter, girl of all trades, demon hunter, magic using person. She's really talented. She's really good at what she does, but she only takes odd jobs, mostly from her despicable ex-boyfriend. Throughout the book, we see why that is and what changed in her life. She's a really tough character. There's a lot of cursing. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of icky body things and gross, goopy, horror-y substances and stuff, but I really enjoyed this. And in the beginning we kind of meet her, see what she does, meet some of the cast of characters, both good and nefarious, and then we see the kind of main plot starting like a quarter of the way in through the book, which is that her old friend that she was friends with when they were younger comes back into her life unexpectedly. They kind of had not seen each other for a long time because of this friend's boyfriend slash husband, and now this woman is back in Julie's life. So there's a little bit of a slow burn romance. There's talk of abusive relationships. There's talk of the past. And Julie gathers this found family around her to help her basically save the world. So the stakes are a little bit high, but this is a really fun one. I love that it was sapphic. I love the found family aspects, and I would definitely read more of this series. I think it's just supposed to be a duology, and I did go online and look, and Richard Kadri said he is working on the next one. That was late last year, so hopefully the sequel to this book will come out in the next year or so. I do think that this set you up with a lot of characters. Like, we follow Julie mostly, but then we also follow her friends sometimes. We follow some bad guys sometimes. We follow some other people sometimes, which made me think that there was either going to be more books in this series beyond the duology, or there were going to be like companion people, because like they spent kind of a long time on people that like seemingly don't really matter. So maybe there's going to be companion books with these people in them. Overall, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fine. If you want to see more of my thoughts, check out that blog. The next book that I read in April was Clapback by Nalo Hopkinson. This is the first by that author that I've read, and this is a very short story. It follows a couple of different timelines in the past where a young woman is using nanotechnology and like nanobots to put on an art performance, and then at around the same time it's following a fashion designer who has also used these nanobots or similar nanobots to imbue clothes with stories. When you put the clothes on, the nanobots seep into your body. You are, compelled to tell a story that the nanobots have basically like told you into your body. So there's those two people going on, and then we see later in life of these people, and then we see the granddaughter of the original artist even later in life. It's kind of about taking back negative racial stereotypes. It's kind of about the idea of people using those stereotypes for their own gain. It's about the appropriation of Black people's stories and how those are used, misrepresented, or the misrepresentation of Black people throughout history. So it was really interesting. I thought it was good. I liked it. I've heard mixed things about Nalo Hopkinson's writing, but this definitely made me want to read more. The next book that I read in April was Drop, Cover, and Hold On, which was by Jasmine Guillory. This is one of those short stories, and it's a romance. I was excited to read this one because Jasmine Guillory has a sapphic romance series or series of companion novels that I was interested in. After reading this, though, I don't know if Guillory is the writer for me. Drop, Cover, and Hold On follows a young woman who is out for her like morning coffee and pastry run, and she's like avoiding this specific bakery. So we hear about how this bakery came into the neighborhood in LA not too long ago, and she really, really loves it, but she wants to avoid it because the owner of the bakery is so mean and rude to her every time she goes in, and of course is impossibly handsome as well. She does end up going to the bakery in this story, and as she does, an earthquake hits LA, and our baker, who is a transplant from New York City, is totally unprepared for this, and somehow they get kind of stuck together, and of course you know, fall in love. But this was so long. Like, this was an hour and 5 minutes, and I swear to God, it felt like I was reading like a 5-hour book or something. I had to keep speeding it up. I started at 1.5 speed, which is what I usually read all these short stories on, and I went to 1.7 speed, I went to 2, I went to 2.15 or something like that, because it was taking forever. I don't know. It was just felt really, really long and boring. The miscommunication trope of the guy hating the heroine was really drawn out for no reason, and then there was like a kind of a sexy scene that happened really fast, and I don't know, it was just really bad. Oh my God, you know what I wanted to say about A Flicker in the Dark, which I hated too, which I don't know why Drop Cover and Hold On reminded me of this, but there was a part where our main character goes to visit her sick mother, and her sick mother is basically like gonna die from not eating, and then we never find out. She goes and she learns something, and then she leaves, and she leaves her poor mom. She might have died by the end of this, like ridiculous. Anyway, sorry. I hope that's not spoilers, but it was awful. But so Drop Cover and Hold On had a similar thing in that obviously our main character was very worried about her family in the earthquake, but then she was like, oh, I should worry about them, but like I'm more interested in this guy. I didn't like it. I don't know. I mean, would I try something else from this author? Maybe, but like, I don't think she's for me. The next book that I finished in April was The Catcher Was a Spy, The Mysterious Life of Mo Berg by Nicholas Dodadoff. Mo Berg was a baseball player in the 1920s and 30s, and he became a well-loved pitcher. He wasn't necessarily a well-known pitcher due to some accidents and injuries. He never became like a great baseball player, but people really loved him, and that's kind of the whole story of Mo Berg's life, is he was this like extremely charismatic man, and it got him in like the weirdest positions in life and doing the weirdest things. So Mo Berg was a second generation immigrant from Ukraine, and he was Jewish at a time when Jews were definitely very much looked down upon in the US. Mo Berg was born in New York City, but the whole family moved to Newark, where Berg's father had a very profitable, what's that called, pharmacy in Newark. Mo Berg's father was really hard on his 3 kids, and he really wanted them to like succeed in a way that he felt they should. Mo Berg's older brother became a doctor, his sister became a teacher, and Mo Berg was supposed to be a lawyer, but Mo Berg really wanted to do other things and lead his own life, and this caused a lot of tension between he and his father. He did eventually become a lawyer, but in the meantime, he went to Princeton, and then he went to Columbia Law School, and he became a famous baseballer, and he played with many Major League Baseball franchises throughout his days, and he made tons of friends. That's just like the beginning part of his life. The whole next part of his life, he starts to work for the OSS, which is the government office that was like spies before the CIA was spies. This is at the beginning of the Second World War, and they send Mo Berg all around Europe to try and learn if Germany has the atomic bomb. And at the same time, he knows a lot about the Manhattan Project and what's going on with the American atomic bomb. But the thing that Mo Berg really gravitated towards with spy work was like secrecy overall. First and foremost, he loved secrecy, and he loved that he was able to surround himself or camouflage himself with secrecy and never have to fully commit to having relationships with people. When the OSS is disbanded and the CIA is started, he doesn't really get to work for the CIA, but his whole life now is all about this spy life. And so for the last 25 years of Mo Berg's life, he's really just like a vagabond. Many people call him a vagabond. And he's couch surfing, and he's being like a professional guest. He's just going to friends' houses and still being very mysterious. His life was really mostly sad, I think, because he couldn't make these connections, and partly that was due to the relationship to his father and his family and their conflicting ideas about family and family obligation. And then also Mo Berg was pretty racist and pretty misogynistic as well, which definitely helped isolate him. And there's also kind of a hint that maybe he was a pedophile. A lot of people have speculated that Mo Berg was either asexual or bisexual or closeted queer. This book kind of made it out to like maybe he had predilections that were not healthy for himself and others, and that's why he was always so standoffish around the sexual side or the romantic side of people. He did have romantic liaisons with women and possibly with men, although none are specifically stated. He was ostensibly like a very charismatic, nice guy, and most people really, really liked him, but then other people he made very uncomfortable. So there's some question about it. He did definitely lead an interesting life, and I think this is almost a cautionary tale for not being isolated from people in your life. And it was an interesting book. Not my favorite narrative nonfiction. I don't think the way it was structured was perhaps the best, especially at the end. In the end part of his life, it's structured so that you just see different places that Moberg went. So like Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Boston, what he did there. But especially in that part, it was very repetitive. So they would talk about the same things. And I think that was mostly a product of this book being almost entirely compiled by the author doing interviews with different people. So he would interview someone who maybe saw Mo in Boston and Philadelphia. So in the Philadelphia section, he talks about that person and they say something. And then in the Boston section, that same person is talking, or each person in each place has the same thing to say about Moberg. Because the thing with Moberg was he definitely told people stories, and he was a great storyteller, but the stories were very curated to be what he wanted. So he told the same stories over and over again because he wanted people to perceive him a specific way. But I think as far as writing this book, this biography, it didn't work because you just heard a lot of the same things over and over again, and it was not like strictly linear, especially at the end. And then I also think this author threw in like so many $10 words or whatever you want to call them, like used so many big words and this vast vocabulary, which is like, fine, but who are you doing that for? Like, you're only doing it for yourself, because if the reader has to stop every 10 or 15 pages to figure out what word you meant, why? That's going to detract from the overall story. And I would say that I have a pretty vast vocabulary, and I am able to skip looking those words up if I want and just understand what they mean through context, but I shouldn't have to do it quite so often, is my thoughts. So I did enjoy this one. It'll definitely go on my baseball shelf, and I read this for a baseball vlog. I started reading it like a week before opening day, and I was just hoping to get it done before then and get the vlog out. No way. It took me like a month to read this. It was very long. It was not boring so much as it was tedious. So if you're interested in this subject, which I am, I would say go for it, but if you're not, definitely skip this one. So those are the first, I don't know how many books that I've read so far. When I read some more, I will let you know. It is April 21st, and I finished 4 more books in April. The next book that I finished in April is Brooklyn in Love by Amy Thomas. This is a nonfiction that I picked up because it's about someone who is in Brooklyn. The byline is a delicious memoir of food, family, and finding yourself. So this is Amy's story about how she meets her husband and the father of her child in Brooklyn with OkCupid, which is how I met my husband, and in Brooklyn. So that's fun. I was interested to read this. It reminded me in the idea of that book that I read a while ago. I can't remember the name, that was all about foraging in Brooklyn, and it's like a similar story of like a young woman who comes to Brooklyn, finds herself and her passion, and then lives life, basically. That book was terrible, by the way. I will put a picture of it. It was really bad. It was one of the worst books I read that year. This is also really bad. In some ways, I'm the perfect audience for this book, and in some ways, I am not the audience for this book. Like, the writing style is like twee and annoying. It's not my book because this author kind of claims that even though she was an independent, adventurous, self-sustaining woman, like, she found herself through getting married, becoming domesticated, and like having a kid. I don't believe in that, obviously. I don't believe that that is how you find yourself. You might like that person, but obviously it does not cancel out the other aspects of your life. And she does talk about that a little, the idea that her hobbies, some of them had to go by the wayside, that she had to make changes in her life that she never expected to make because she fell in love, because she had a baby, etc., etc. And the whole point of this particular memoir is that it revolves around food. Amy is I can't remember. She had some kind of like corporate job, but then on the side, she wrote a food blog and did food traveling at a time when that was like a big deal. So like in the early 2000s, she was doing this. And I think this book was written in the 2010s. Yeah, 2018 this was written. So I think it takes place it starts taking place about 10 years earlier. And Amy talks about her life and how food was really the catalyst for a lot of things in her life, and restaurants were super important to her. And when she had the opportunity to move to Paris to work for her company, but also she could do food travel and food blogging on the side, she did that. Within each chapter, there's usually something about the food scene in New York. So one of the things that I was super excited about was that she talks about 4 and 20 Blackbirds, which is a famous pie shop in Brooklyn, New York, in the Gowanus area. And I worked for Emily and Melissa for a couple of years. I helped them open one of their cafes, and I really enjoyed working with them. I love their ethos. I love the ingredients they use. I love their pies. And I love the sisters just in general. So it was nice to see someone talking about 4 and 20 Blackbirds and extolling the virtues of their company and their idea. Amy interviewed them, or at least used an interview with them. There's nice little bits about different restaurateurs and different chefs and different food people in Brooklyn at this time. And of course, because I was on the food scene in that time to a certain extent as well, it definitely resonates with me. And there are people that I know, or people that I've worked with, or people that I admire, or people that I've eaten at their restaurants. So that part was definitely for me. But the problem is I don't think it would be for anyone else. Like, I don't think if you didn't have some knowledge of the things that she's talking about, this would interest you. I mean, I guess if you're like a real foodie and you have never heard of any of these people, which if you were a real foodie, you definitely would have heard of some of these people, you might be interested in learning about them. But because the biographies of those people are so small and slight, and because they tie back to Amy's life, they're just not interesting unless you know who they are. And then at the end of every chapter, she has like a little highlighted area that talks about something that she's mentioned in the chapter. So for instance, this one is brunch, because she talks about going to brunch and how brunch became like a huge deal in Brooklyn and in New York around this time. And it kind of set the stage for brunch as we know it in other places as well. And it does talk a lot about that, how the food scene in New York and Brooklyn like ripples out, and how things like donuts that were so popular 15, 20 years ago in Brooklyn like kind of rippled out to all the different places, and now like specialty donuts are a huge food attraction in many different places. But it just feels very dated. It feels very self-indulgent. And then her story of like meeting her husband was just kind of like, okay, I mean, it wasn't like inspirational or anything. She met him online. She liked him, but she didn't know if she liked him a lot. He worked hard to like get past her defenses, and then they got married. And yes, it talks about them being in love, and yes, it talks about honeymoon stage and refinding love after difficult times and going through difficult times and whatever. Like, I don't care about this person's story necessarily. There was nothing revolutionary about it. There was nothing groundbreaking. Amy seems, or at least makes herself seem, pretty like selfish and silly and spoiled throughout everything. Oh my god. Not to mention she and her husband are incredibly privileged. There's a whole section talking about them looking for apartments in Brooklyn, and the whole time I thought they were renting, but no. They're buying an apartment, and they're buying an apartment that they can afford to then redo and fix up. This is not really relatable for many people, especially many people who live in Brooklyn. I did not think this was good. I didn't think it was particularly poorly written, but I didn't think it was particularly well written, and I didn't think it was particularly gripping or interesting. I did like the nostalgia aspect of it. I did like hearing about people that I knew. I did like hearing about areas that I knew in Brooklyn. You know me, I love books about Brooklyn. I love books about places that I've lived or been, but overall, skip it. The next story that I read in April was The Nosy Neighbor by Nita Prose. This is the second short story by Nita Prose that I've read. This is about an older woman whose husband is immobile, so she spends most of her time at home taking care of him, and she looks out her window and she spies mostly on her one neighbor, who is this eccentric, brash, slightly younger woman who seems to never get along with her husband. She has affairs with other men. She does things without him. She puts him down for not doing things with her. And our main character is like tisking her and how she treats her husband, especially because like our main character loves her husband so much. So throughout this book, we see our main character watching that neighbor, but also kind of helping that neighbor when the neighbor goes out of town and our main character watches her house. But as our main character observes her neighbor more and more, she starts to have suspicions about this neighbor. And that's all I'll say about that. There is like some twists in this, and it is a very short story, and I think it was a fun story, and I liked the plot of it, and I liked the idea of it, but I didn't really like the writing, and I kind of feel like that's exactly what happened with the other short story that I read from Nita Prose. So I decided to unhaul The Maid. Was never super interested in it, and now I'm like definitely not interested in it. In The Nosy Neighbor, Nita Prose also kind of plays up someone's seeming like disability, similar to the other story that I read and similar to The Maid by Nita Prose, and I just doesn't seem own voices. I don't vibe with her writing style, so I'm not going to read anything else by her, I don't think. The next book that I finished in April is Madonna in a Fur Coat by Sabahattin Ali. This is a modern classic. It is a Turkish author, and it was translated from Turkish by Maureen Freely and Alexander Daw. This is about a young man down on his luck. He starts at a new company. Because this job was kind of made for him, he's kind of put in like a back office with a translator that nobody really likes in the office. This translator seems very odd, and he is very antisocial, but people are antisocial to him as well. So the young man sees things about this translator and becomes kind of intrigued by his life, becomes sort of friends with the translator. So we see the translator is often sick, and the young man helps him by bringing work home to him or by picking things up. In that way, the young man learns more about the translator's life, about his family. And then the majority of this book takes place when the translator asks the young man to bring him a notebook from work, and it is like the diary of the translator's life, and he lets the young man take it home, and then that part of the story is an epistolary novel where the young man is reading the life story as told by the translator. We see the translator as a young man, and we see him leaving Turkey and going to Germany to become a translator and to do work there, and about his love affair with Madonna in the Fur Coat, which is an artist that he becomes enamored about. So we see how they meet and their relationship, and this book is kind of all about the relationship between people, and specifically the relationship between men and women, and how that can be very complicated. Men have certain idea of women, women have certain idea of men, people have certain ideas about relationships. Madonna in the Fur Coat kind of turns some of that on its head, because she's really a person who doesn't want to follow tradition. She's really a person who feels like she can't find love, or she is incapable of loving men. There's even a part where she says, like, well, I wish I could love women, but I don't love them either. It's kind of about her effect on the translator and how that changed the course of his life and how it kind of opened his eyes to different things. But I don't think it's particularly like groundbreaking. I mean, maybe it was in its day. It's kind of things that you've seen before, heard before. It doesn't definitively say that non-traditional relationships are better. It was interesting. I enjoyed it. I read this book on audio. It was pretty slow. There's not a lot that happens action-wise or intrigue-wise. It's really just getting to know these two people in the relationship that they're in, and then kind of thinking about the young man and what he might think about this. And then we see kind of the end where he's finished the notebook and what he does with this information. I didn't love it. I probably will keep this, and I probably would reread it just to see if I could glean more out of it. It does have a little bit about like the arts and pre-war Germany and post-war Germany, Turkish tradition, things like that. So like little glimpses that like maybe if I read more Turkish work will make more sense to me. Maybe if I read more German work will make more sense to me. So I would definitely consider keeping this, but not a favorite. Next, I read another short story and another author that I've never read from before. It was called How It Unfolds by James S.A. Corey. James S.A. Corey is is actually a writing duo, and they're best known for the Expanse series. They're all long, very long sci-fi novels. How It Unfolds is also a sci-fi time travel novel, and it is about a time in the future where you can like live a lot of different lives. There's idea of like transferring your consciousness into different people and into different timelines and into different clones, and how different lives might be lived differently if you do that, and the decisions you make, the ripple effect of decisions that we make, the butterfly effect of things that happen. How It Unfolds mostly follows one young man who got married early and the marriage didn't work out, and he's kind of been looking to see what life would have been like under different circumstances for the rest of his life after that happened. So I thought it was a little bit convoluted. There was quite a lot of characters for being a fairly simple story. There was some time jumps, obviously, that I found a little confusing, but I did like it, and I like the writing style, so I would definitely read more by this author. I don't think I would read that huge epic space opera of the Expanse series, but I would read something else by them. These authors. A classic case is the next short story that I read, and this is by Alicia Thompson. I looked it up, and Alicia Thompson is not someone I've ever thought about reading from before. They write paranormal and mysterious, cozy romance, I think. I don't know. I mean, it could not be cozy in far as like it might be smutty. I'm not sure. But I really enjoyed this story. It is about a young woman who goes to the same video store every day. She goes to this video store and rents videos, and in the process of doing this all the time, she meets an older man who also comes in every day, and she meets the owner of this video store. And you find out through the story why our main character thinks that the video store owner doesn't like her. When the older man goes missing, doesn't come in at his regular scheduled time that he comes in every day at, she starts to get suspicious of everyone and everything, and she takes it into her hands to investigate. There's a cat in this one too, a spoiled cat at that, and I really like this one. So it's a little bit mysterious. The main character was definitely cute. You know, she is a little bit paranoid, she's a little bit insecure, but like she has strong moral code, and when she sees a wrong that she needs to right, she doesn't hesitate to do it, which I enjoy in main characters. And I liked the story overall, and I liked the conclusion. This did have a romantic element which comes through, which I thought was pretty cute. It was well paced and interesting. I don't know if I would love a longer story from her, but I would definitely try it out. Those are 5 more books that I've read in April. When I read something else, I will let you know. It is May 5th, and it is time to wrap up my April reads. I have a lot to talk about, more than I thought I would, kind of a lot. The next book that I finished in April was The Indigo Room by Stephen Graham Jones. It's a short story. I thought it was older, but it's actually quite new. It's about a woman who is working in a office building, and there's like a presentation going on in the very beginning of the story, and during that presentation the lights get turned off as kind of like a stunt by one of the younger corporate people who's there. And when this happens, the woman has kind of a hallucination. Our main character hallucinates that she sees someone's arm missing, that she sees different weird things about people. It kind of freaks her out, but she goes about her day. But then as she goes about her day, other weird things start happening, and maybe they're connected to this initial hallucination. So this one was interesting. I really love Stephen Graham Jones's writing, but this is a very different setting that I've seen him write before. I haven't read nearly very much of what he's written, so maybe he has other things like this. And I thought the ending was a little confusing the first time I read it, so I did actually reread this again only a couple days later. I'm counting it towards my total overall books read, but I'm not counting it twice on Storygraph or Goodreads because they were so close together. I don't know, it just seems silly to put it right back to back. The second time that I read it, I enjoyed it about the same amount as the first time. I reread it because I thought the ending was a little confusing, and I wasn't sure if I was confused, if it was ambiguous, or if I was distracted. So I decided to reread it. You have to read it yourself and find out. I would suggest reading it. All of these short stories, if you're interested in the author, if you're interested in the story, I would definitely suggest trying them out, especially if you can get them for free, if you're still using that subscription. The next story that I read is The Conjurer's Wife by Sarah Penner. This is the first Sarah Penner that I read. She's most well known for The Lost Apothecary. I think she writes speculative, historic fiction about women, and I really liked The Conjurer's Wife. This one was really good, I thought, so I definitely want to read more Sarah Penner. This follows a young woman who is a conjurer's wife, and as we see her in the beginning of this story, she has kind of taken a stand against her husband because her husband's kind of a jerk, and one of the reasons that she's still with him is partly because of the time period, but partly because she was in a really tragic, terrible accident and has lost a lot of her memories. So she relies on her husband in a lot of ways to keep her going on a path and keep her up to date in kind of what she already knows or what she should already know or what she's already done. But she's starting to, I think, feel resentful about that, and so she kind of starts stepping out of line a little bit, and as she does so, she learns more about her husband and more about her past than she had bargained for. This one, I could tell you what it reminded me of, but I think that would spoil it, so if you want to know what book it reminded me of, ask me in the comments down below and I'll let you know. But I really like the writing. It reminded me a little bit of the Niveau story that I read, in that it was like really interesting. It had some thrilling moments. It was pretty gripping for such a short story and super memorable. A Day and Night in Misery. This is from the same collection as the Stephen Graham Jones, which is one of the latest collections, and this is by Catriona Ward. This is the second Catriona Ward book that I've read. I think all of her books are borderline horror, thriller, mysteries centering around a female character who maybe has some tragedy, who's finding herself or losing herself in her past. This follows a woman who lost her son and husband not too long ago, I think like 5 years ago, and she is traveling to the last place that those people were seen alive. She's traveling to Missouri. She is kind of confronting her past, but her past confronts her as well, and it's quite a surprise to her. So I like this one too. It got a little bananas, which I love. I think all of Ward's books are going to do that, and so I look forward to reading them. I do want to read The Last House on Needless Street, but I keep putting it off because I hear there's animal violence in it, and I don't want to read about animal violence. This is where I read The Indigo Room again, and then the next book I finished after that was The Cat, the Quilt, and the Corpse by Leanne Sweeney. This is the first in a Cat Cozy Mystery series. It's called A Cat in Trouble Mystery Series, and I am doing a Cat Cozy Mystery vlog, so you will see more of my thoughts on this Cat Cozy Mystery and other Cat Cozy Mysteries in that vlog, which hopefully will be coming soon. This follows a older woman, I think she's 40, 42, something like that, and she's living in, oh gosh, I want to say Georgia or South Carolina, and she moved there a little over 5 years ago with her husband, but then last year her husband sadly passed away. So now she's just living there with the cats that she and her husband loved and cared for and rescued from Katrina. She's originally from Texas. Oh, I have the book. Our main character is kind of out of place in her new location, and she's kind of lost in her thoughts and emotions and feelings because she was not expecting to lose her husband so soon. They hadn't even been married that long, and they got together later in life. So she's just concentrating on her quilt business, just trying to like live her life and like get through the grief and everything like that, when one day she comes back from a quilt show and her house has been broken into and one of her beloved cats is missing. So she goes on an adventure to find this cat, and as she does, she meets people from the town, then more mystery ensues. So this was a weird Cat Cozy Mystery. I think it's a little clunky. I think it's a little too cozy mystery. I think there were some weird weight things in here and like weird diet things that like should not have been happening in a book that was written in like 2010 or whenever this was written. But the weirdest thing to me about it was that the cats are kind of in peril more than in a normal Cat Cozy Mystery. Sometimes the cats get in peril a little bit in Cat Cozy Mysteries, but mostly they're protected. In this one, you're really not sure for a good chunk of the book what's going to happen to her missing cat. So it was a little jarring, and I think it's worth noting, and it's not really a spoiler to say that because it happens throughout the whole first part of the book. I think it was worth it to push through, and although there is cat violence and cat death in this a little bit, it's not graphic and it's more natural. I don't know if that's a spoiler or not. I'll say this, it's not the kind of cat violence that would make me stop reading this book or this series. I did take some issue with, like I said, those kind of outdated notions of like diet and body type and discussing women's bodies, which were just unnecessary, but I'm hoping that maybe because this one is a little bit older, like as the series goes on, we kind of shed those outdated things and focus more on the story. I liked that our main character was older. This was first published in 2009. I liked her backstory. I liked the cats. I liked the amount of cat activity in this cat cozy mystery, so I definitely will continue on with the series. The next story that I finished in April was Cruel Winter with You by Ali Hazelwood. This is the second, I think only the second Ali Hazelwood that I read. I think I read whatever her first big Star Wars fan fiction was. Cruel Winter with You was an interesting story, an interesting concept. It's about a woman, probably in her like 30s, home for Christmas, and her neighbor who she grew up with her whole life is home for Christmas as well. And they run into each other when she goes to his house to borrow something from his parents. His parents are not there. They went on a cruise. There's a storm, and they end up having to share this space, this cruel winter night together. As that happens, we start to see their backstory and how they knew each other as kids, how her best friend was his sister, and our main character kind of spools out the relationship that they've had over time. And he's definitely like, you know, I would die for you. He's been in love with her the whole time. I don't think that's a spoiler to say. It comes out right away. We find out like why it could work or why it couldn't work, and then it's a romance. I liked the way the actual story was doled out. I liked the structure of this short story. I liked the characters to a certain extent, but they were just so, I don't know, there was just something about this story that was like, it fell flat, or it was boring, or there was something weird about it. I can't like put my finger on it that I just didn't love, and I just think that Ali Hazelwood is not for me. I think there was a steamy scene in this, like I can't even remember. I like the devotion of the hero to the heroine. I like that in the stories that I've read by her, or in the books that I've read by her, there's a lot of like tension between the characters that is somewhat sexual tension, or at sometimes sexual tension, but there's just something about her writing that I just don't love. I would say if you like Ali Hazelwood, definitely read this one, and as long as you don't mind reading a Christmas book this late in the year, or this early in the year, depending on how you think about it, I would try another short story of hers, but I'm not like super stoked about it. The next book that I finished in April is Sleepless Nights by Elizabeth Hardwick. It is NYRB April, and I almost forgot until the end of the month. I have put out a whole NYRB April video. Sleepless Nights is a autofiction, vignette-y, fever dream, stream of consciousness type book where we see our main character Elizabeth through her kind of ruminations at night about her life. So we see some of her past, we jump around to the future, we see about like lovers and friends, relationships, and all different things. I read this one on audio. It's super short, and I did really enjoy it. I thought it was really interesting. It wasn't like a satisfying novel, but it's not really that kind of book. So I'm excited to read more Elizabeth Hardwick and then dip in and out of this one or reread this one physically so that I can get maybe a better glimpse into both her life with the autofiction and into her writing with like the fiction side of it. And then the next book that I finished was another NYRB book, and this one I also read on audio, My Dog Tulip by J.R. Ackerley. And I guess this one was made into a movie, but I don't know how. This is a non-fiction book about J.R. Ackerley's dog Tulip and how much he loved her. She is a Abyssinian, I think the name of the dog is called. He got her her kind of on a whim. He just wanted a dog and he got her, and he ended up completely falling in love with her. And this story is about their friendship and about his realizations about dog companionship and about dog ownership and about dog stewardship. Man, oh man, there's a lot of dog sex in this book. There's a lot of feces, there's a lot of dog penises, there's a lot of dog vagina, there's a lot of dog sex and talk about dog sex and mating his dog. I mean, like, the majority of the book is stories like just about his dog being in heat and him wanting to mate off his dog. Now, this book was written in the 40s or 50s, so it is definitely outdated in its mindset of dogs. Like, you know, they weren't neutering dogs that much. They weren't even operating on dogs that much at the time. All of this would be solved if his dog was spayed. It's not, and it talks a lot about it. I thought it was an interesting book, and I like books about the relationship between animals and humans and the love and the bond between animals and humans, but there was way too much dog sex in this to make it like a fun read. It was okay. It was interesting. I'm not entirely sure why this is like considered a modern classic and why NYRB decided to choose this, and I cannot imagine what the movie's about, because let me tell you, the dog sex, you know what I'm saying? I would read more from this author, and I'd be interested to like hear other people's thoughts on this or hear more discussion about like why this is a seminal work about dog relationships. The last book that I read in April is Shore of You by Armistead Maupin. I partly read this because it is Trans Girl April, and the Tales of the City books do have a trans character in them. This is, I think, the 6th book in the series, and it is actually one of the books that is supposedly like an ending point where Armistead Maupin said this is the end of these people's story. So Tales of the City is a serialized story. It was serialized in a San Francisco paper in the 60s and 70s. The first book, Tales of the City, follows Marianne Singleton as she comes over for a visit to San Francisco from Ohio, her hometown, where she's never really left, and she decides to stay. In the first book, or a couple of books, we're seeing life from Marianne's perspective, and we're learning about San Francisco, we're learning about queerness, we're learning about bohemianness, we're learning about anti-war, we're learning about civil rights, we're learning about all these things that like a innocent wide-eyed girl from Ohio might not have heard of or might not know about. And Marianne Singleton stumbles upon 28 Barbary Lane, where she finds an apartment, and she meets all the different cast of characters, including Mona, who is a kind of free spirit holdover from the 60s. She meets Mrs. Madrigal, the landlady of 28 Barbary Lane. She meets Michael Mouse, a queer man like making his way. He's also from a small town, but he knows so much more about the world than Marianne does. She meets Brian, who is a current bartender and past disillusioned lawyer, and a whole other cast of characters. A lot of people come and go within these stories, and some of them we stick with and some of them we don't, and lots of them come back and lots of them we see their lives throughout, and that happens in this book. In this book, it's set in the 90s. So one of the great things about Tales of the City is that it goes with the times. So the first one was written in the late 60s, early 70s, and then we have the mid 70s, we have the late 70s, we have the 80s, and this one is a book that is set in the 90s. In this book, we see where Marianne and Brian and Michael, Mrs. Madrigal and Mona all are at the 90s at this time, and I won't say like where they are because you definitely want to read the whole series. Because this series was serialized, it's so fun and quick to get through. I mean, first of all, it's a ton of dialogue. The chapters are super short. We bounce around from different people, but it's not one chapter's Marianne, one chapter's Brian, one chapter's Marianne. Sometimes we're reading from Michael, sometimes we're reading from Brian, sometimes we're reading from a totally other person, sometimes we're reading from Mrs. Madrigal. There's a lot of different people involved, and you kind of flit around, and through reading the entire story you get everyone's backstory and you hear about people that you've read in other books. So people who come in and out, people who are integral to the story, or people who are side characters in the story. Most recently, one came out in 2024, which he says is going to be the last in the series, but we've heard that before, so fingers crossed it's not the last in the series. This book was really interesting because I think, especially after Significant Others, which is the last book, it takes a very different tone, and I think a lot of that has to do with the time period, and a lot of it has to do with the growth of characters, and it follows people that you love but who have changed so much over the series that you kind of hate them. That's how I felt in this book. Like, there was a lot of things that happened in this book that I felt were really sad and really not an injustice to the character, but like the character's injustice to their own storyline. Like, I don't think Amistad Maupin did anything wrong or made you specifically hate a character for any reason. I don't even think he changed their character to be a villain or whatever. The character themselves did that, and this is a natural progression of where some of those characters would end up, but I didn't like it. Like, they chose the wrong path. The characters themselves chose the wrong way to go, and I wonder if we'll see that reversed or changed in future books. The next book, which is Michael Tolliver Lives, does not have this same serialized style because it was written quite a few years later, and I think it was just a very different tone of book, so I'm interested to read that one. I may read that one in June. This was a new read for me, and it would be interesting maybe read these on audio at some point, but go through the whole series and just read them all together. You can't read these as standalones. I mean, you can, but they wouldn't make as much sense, so I definitely suggest going all the way back and starting with Tales of the City at number 1. So those are all the books that I read in April. I read 24 books, counting that double read, in April, and that still might be too many books, and I definitely was feeling in a little bit of a reading slump at some points during this month. I read for so many readathons. I read for Trans Girl April. I also had a DNF for the Trans Girl April, which is unfortunate, but we'll talk about that another time. I finally finished my baseball book for my baseball blog. I read for NYRB April. I read 2 TBR Spin books this month. I read a ton of short stories, but I have burnt out on reading those short stories, so I probably won't read those for a while. So super excited, super happy with all the things that I've read. Looking back, there was a lot of things that I really liked. There was a couple of things that I didn't really like. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here. Let me know what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!